It's time for the Engaged Club, the podcast for club managers and operators that strive to create loyal and connected members, guests, and customers. Here are the two guys with the club management and digital marketing advice you need to realize your club's potential. Jim Hope and Roger Kincaid.
It's great to have you for another episode of the Engaged Club. I'm Roger Kincaid. I handle the sales and marketing at Off Course Golf. That's offcourse.golf.
I'm Jim Hope, and I am the GM of the Derrick Golf and Winter Club. How are you, Roger?
Jim, I'm just awesome today, man. And I'm really excited about hearing you delve into the world of board governance, I guess, club governance.
Oh, Roger, it's a hot topic amongst club managers, whether you're having a beer after a round of golf or you're at a conference, walking around the trade show and chatting about your club, or you're sitting at a table prior to an education session. At some point in time, the conversation is going to come back to the governance at your club, whether it's, good, bad, or ugly, what challenges you're facing, and how it's making you feel at the club. So it's a topic that we spend lots and lots of time talking about amongst managers, and certainly managers spend talking with their board.
All right. Well, we're going to spend 7 or 8 minutes talking about it on this episode of the Engaged Club. What are we going to get to at the end of this conversation, Jim?
I'd like to leave the people listening with 4 takeaways of things that they can focus on at their club to try and bring their club over to the great governance model. Pretty simple stuff, things that most managers probably already know and most would already be doing. So as much as there might not be anything new here for them, it'll reinforce that what they're doing is the right things. And for those that are struggling maybe to find out how to move their governance model to more of a strategic model for the board, so that management can be charged with operations and the board will be charged with the strategic direction. Hopefully there's a couple of takeaways they're going to get from this. All
right, beautiful. We'll start us off then.
Well, what I'd like to start with is that, again, this is a constant topic of conversation that we have amongst managers because it affects us so deeply every day at our club. It not only does it affect us as the leaders of the club, but it's going to trickle down to the balance of the team as well as the members. So it's something that you need to be able to get right at your club. And when you have it right, you have it. Just like when it's wrong and when it's not working well, it's not working well, and it affects you every single day. I mean, it really does drive your happiness and success at your club. I know for me that when I'm working in a club with a great governance model, I'm working with a sense of confidence, and I know that I can. I'm challenged to do things better. I'm challenged to think outside the box. I'm not afraid to make some mistakes because I know that I have the support and I have the confidence of the board. The opposite of that is that when you're working in an environment where you sort of feel like you're being micromanaged, where any mistake that you do will be amplified because it's going to become a big topic of conversation, you start to operate in a position of fear, and that's not any way that you want to. That's not the way you're going to be the most successful. It's certainly not the way that you're going to shine and you're going to bring out your best attributes. And that is going to focus and filter down to your team as well, and they'll operate with those same reservations that you have. And honestly, I mean, that's not what you're hired to do. You're hired by your club to bring your best. We talked about, in a previous podcast, talked about your all versus your best. And, you're hired to do your best. And to do that, you need to be in a position where you're supported and encouraged by your board. So, I mean, just some of the obvious signs of bad governance is that, you'll find your board is really focused on every single line item on your income statement, as opposed to taking a more global approach and looking at what the net income is of your club. They're going to look at every single line item and want to dive into each one of those. The opposite of that is you got a board that's focused on the balance sheet. They're looking at what's the member equity, because they know that their job is to build that member equity line and to bring value to the members from a capital and a strategic standpoint at the club. Bad governance, you have it when you've got a board that is consistently tell you how to operate the club on a day-to-day basis versus a club where they're giving you feedback and they set goals for you. So they'll set annual goals. They'll review those on a quarterly or a semi-annual basis. And then at the end of the year, they'll determine whether or not you achieved your goals, but they'll let you determine how to achieve them as opposed to telling you how to do that. The same way you want to operate with your team. You want to set goals and an annual action plan for your team, and then you want to guide them in succeeding in fulfilling that action plan, but you don't want to tell them on a daily basis on how to do that. If you've got a board that is a little challenged, they're going to try and manage the staff instead of recognizing that they have one staff member, which is you, and you have a bunch of people working for you. They're going to try and manage everybody if they can. And a good board, as I said earlier, will support, encourage, and guide the general manager, which is really important. Often, you'll see a board that's looking down, that they're looking at the day-to-day operations, or looking at what you're doing today and what you're doing tomorrow. If you've got a good board, they've got their head up and they're looking forward. They're not looking about what you want to do tomorrow. They're looking at what we need to do next year, what we need to do 5 years from now, and what the club's going to look like 10 years from now. So their full focus is on the long-term strategies and vision of the club, and not on the day-to-day operations. And they're not going to make decisions about today. They're going to let you make the decisions about today, and they're going to make the decisions about the future. And lastly, I think, when you've got a board that is challenged, they're going to operate in a fog of questioning. They're going to be sort of questioning everything that you do. And I'm still uncertain as to why that happens sometimes. I think it's the makeup of, some of the individuals, but they're going to question sort of all of the decisions you make, as opposed to offering you trust and giving you the authority and the support that you need in order to be able to do your job well. So, good governance really makes you excited to come into work every day. You come into work with confidence. You come into work knowing that you've got the support of your board, which allows you to operate with more freedom. Because you know that if you make a mistake, you're not going to be criticized for it. You yourself will look back and try and get some learnings from that if you can. But you're doing it because you know you're doing it in the best interest of the club, and you'll make your decisions always in the best interest of the club, not in the interest of certain constituents. And that's really important to do, that our job is to make sure that we're making decisions that look out for everybody, and
right,
not just look out for certain people.
That's a powerful point, because you don't want your manager managing the club out of fear of one individual on the board, and then you're essentially running an entire club to appease one person.
You bet. Success in our industry is understanding the dynamic of the board and the dynamic of the individuals, but you really have to operate at a higher level that that the decisions that you're making are going to be in the best interest of the members as a whole, either the current member and the future member that's coming in. And, in most cases, the managers are the most in tune as to who that is. They really know most of the members as a global group, whereas, most members of the club, by just human nature, and it'd be the same if I was at a club, we'd have a group that you'd hang out with, and that would be the group that you would know most. But there are other constituents and other groups at the club that you may not spend a lot of time with. But it's our job as the GM to spend time with those groups and make sure that we understand what all of our members are thinking and wanting. And there's some strategies you could do that by membership surveys. We can talk about strategic plans, and then that's one of the takeaways I'm going to leave. But there are ways that you can go out and make sure that you give all the constituents an opportunity to give feedback on the club, both operationally and strategically.
That sounds to me like it's the key then to changing. If you are a club manager and you recognize that maybe we've got some bad governance, we have a few individuals who are focused on the minutia, the sand, the granularity of day-to-day operations, as opposed to being focused on the big picture. How does someone in a club management position, Jim, affect the kind of positive change so that you can steer your governance from bad to good?
Well, I think there's a number of different tactics that you can use, but firstly, you need an overall strategy that's supported by the club and by the board, that they want to move to a different governance model, that they want to move to a model where the board is very strategic thinking, are there to develop policies, and the management is there to look after the day-to-day operation of the club and implement those policies that the board develop. And if you've got that want, I think a couple of takeaways that you can have is that, it starts with strategic planning. You need to be able to develop a long-term vision for the club that is supported by input from the members, and that will give the board something to bite into, something that they know that they need to focus on in order that the club be successful, not just today, but but 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, and 10 years from now. And that really is a great, the strategic plan, which is the end result of the process. That there's a variety of things that are involved in the process of developing that plan. But I think what's interesting is to see the change that you'll see in your board in the development of the strategic plan, because they recognize that this is a multi-million-dollar a year operation with millions of dollars of assets, and their focus will change on to becoming stewards of those assets as opposed to the responsibility of the day-to-day operations of the club. And don't forget that all members have input into that strategic plan, because in most strategic plans, it will incorporate a membership survey so that you can get to all of those constituents that not everybody may see all the time, but they'll be able to have input into the development of that plan so that you know that when you're moving forward with the interests of all of the members of the club. I think one of the things you can do too as part of the structure of your board is develop a skills matrix. It's pretty simple. Like if you've got 9 directors on your board, which is pretty common at most clubs, what are the skills that you want on your board? Maybe you're in the middle of a big building project and you need somebody with some construction experience. But if you look every year at the skills that the board bring to the table, and the board can do that in completion of a skills matrix so they can tell you what they have expertise in, you can see on an annual basis what skills you might be missing, and you can recruit that during the nominating process for new directors so that you know that you've got a great blend on the board of expertise so that they can offer you, you're bringing expertise in specific areas of the club or specific areas of operation of the club to be able to help you and give you advice and guidance. So you have an accountant, you have a lawyer, you have somebody with construction experience, someone who's got some human resource experience, maybe somebody who's got some marketing experience. So all of those skills that you need help with and you need support with, you make sure you have those on the board of directors as well. And one of the things that the board can do is do a self-evaluation. They can evaluate each other, they can evaluate themselves, and they can also evaluate each other on an annual basis from a governance standpoint. Are you showing up prepared for the meetings? Do they have the material with them? Are they offering input? Are they balanced in their approach to the decisions that they make at the club? We're charged often as the leaders of the club with doing performance reviews of our team, but who does the performance review of the board? And it's interesting when they start to do self-evaluations, evaluations on themselves, and then they do one of each other. I think you can get some honest feedback, and I think it's good that the board does that and they reflect on how they were as a board on an annual basis. And we talked a little bit about the nominating process from a skills standpoint, but I think the nominating process at a club can't be somebody walking into the lounge and going, "Hey, who wants to run for the board this year?" And as soon as you get 3 hands or 4 hands go up, you go, "My job's done. I've got my 4 people."
Yeah.
And that happens more often than not at a club.
Okay.
I'll go talk to my buddies and see if anybody wants to run, and you come back and you go, "Well, that's done," because it can be the nominating process can be challenging because you may be having more people running than you have spots available. So somebody's not going to get elected, and that's not a comfortable position for somebody to be in. And it may not be a comfortable position for a member of the club who is the chair of a nominating committee to be able to tell another member of the club that their name isn't going to be put forward by the nominating committee. So it's not easy to have an effective nominating process, but when you do, you will bring forward really good, solid candidates who are there for the right reasons. And lastly, a good governance starts with strong leadership on the board and a process, an agreed upon process for what the board's responsibilities are and what management's responsibilities. And you can have all the paperwork and have all the support in the background, but at the end of the day, it comes down to strong leadership from the board standpoint, just like the success of the club comes from strong leadership from management.
Well done, man. And that is just a rich wealth of information. And I'm sure that anybody who has questions can send you an email and maybe get even deeper and maybe even like a personal consultation, Jim. I'm not trying to sell your services here, but I'm sure you'd welcome some feedback on this episode if anybody had some questions.
I'd love to have it, Rod, because as I said, it's a topic of conversation amongst managers all the time. And it's something that for me is evolving, and I'm always learning from others on some of their best practices, and be happy to share some of the best practices that we have at our club.
Great. So get in touch with Jim at jim@engagingpeople.ca, or you can just go to the Engaged Club and drop us a line there, engagedclub.com. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, please, by all means, share it with your friends inside and outside of the club business. And until next time, thank you.
This has been the Engaged Club podcast with Jim Hope and Roger Kincaid. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. If you like what you heard, share it with your fellow club managers and operators. Until next time, thanks for listening.